Your pantry is a lie. 33 secrets big food is hiding from you. The cereal glows like a toy. Same box, same mascot, 2 countries, 2 recipes. In London, a warning label tells parents this may affect kids' attention. In Ohio, nothing but a promise of fun. Get this, Gatorade's neon gets toned down abroad, while the US bottle still looks like a highlighter. And yes, our old sodas used an ingredient also found in flame retardants. Why does our pantry look like a chemistry set when the same brands sell cleaner elsewhere? Tonight, 33 secrets big food hopes you won't read on the label. One tiny line of text will change how you shop tonight. The playbook, how big food writes the rules. To see how we got here, we need to go back, not to a lab, but to a conference room where a 3-letter acronym set the table. GRAS, generally recognized as safe. It sounds cautious. It is. Here, S the stakes. What counts as safe in America can be a boardroom decision, not a federal one. The consequence lands in your cart, your kid's lunch, and your doctor's waiting room. What actually happened was simple and slippery. In 1958, Congress created a category for common ingredients like salt and vinegar that didn't need pre-market approval. Over time, companies widened that lane. They can now assemble their own experts, review their own data, and declare a new chemical GRAS, sometimes without even telling the FDA. Action, a manufacturer drafts a GRAS memo, cites unpublished studies, files a notice if they feel like it, and ships pallets. Human reaction, regulators understaffed, shoppers unaware. Impact, thousands of additives entered the food supply under a self-certification system. Investigations by journalists, public interest groups, and academics all describe the same pattern. Industry declares safety, the FDA often learns later, if at all. Meanwhile, something else was happening in Europe. Before a dye or preservative hits shelves, it must be evaluated, assigned an E number, and justified with exposure limits. If there's uncertainty, they pull the brake. That's the precautionary principle. 2 philosophies, 2 pantries. This was the moment everything changed. Cost met shelf life. Additives that prevent rancidity, keep colors bright, and make dough rise the same way every time became the invisible backbone of mass distribution. The stakes weren't abstract. For a snack giant, every extra week of stability means fewer returns, wider trucking windows, and national campaigns that never worry about best-by dates colliding with promotion. What nobody knew at the time, outside of a handful of insiders, was how much lobbying would harden these rules. Trade groups framed restrictions as barriers. Petitions to tighten oversight met further study. State bills were the only places reform gained traction, which meant your zip code, not science alone, decided your ingredients. Meanwhile, companies kept 2 spreadsheets, US recipe and export compliant. Here's a micro story. A mom in Manchester picks up a box of rainbow cereal. The label says, may have an adverse effect on activity and attention in children. She puts it back. That summer, she visits family in Florida and finds the same box, no warning. She texts a photo to her partner. Why did the label disappear at customs? The action behind that text, multinational brands tailor formulas by market. If the EU caps a dye, they swap in plant extracts. If a country bans a dough improver, they use unbromated flour. The US version, it often keeps the legacy additive until a lawsuit, a state ban, or a PR storm forces a change. The impact is quiet but personal. 2 kids, 2 breakfasts, 2 exposures, same mascot. Meanwhile, subsidies and commodity economics stack the deck. Cheap corn sweeteners, palm and seed oils, and synthetic antioxidants beat pricier alternatives in bids. Logistics rewarded uniformity over nuance. A preservative that buys 3 extra months in a hot warehouse wins, even if a shorter ingredient list tastes better. But there was one problem. Science kept moving. State toxicologists flagged neurobehavioral effects from certain dyes in sensitive children. International bodies questioned titanium dioxide's genotoxic potential. Bakers transitioned away from potassium bromate abroad after cancer signals in animals. The US system, built on risk management after harm, is demonstrated lagged. Post-market reviews took years. Corporate messaging filled the gap. Within legal limits, FDA approved, no problem here. While that was happening in New York boardrooms, a very different conversation played out in Brussels. Regulators talked in exposure margins, cumulative intake, and child-specific sensitivity. If a warning label could reduce risk by nudging a parent, they used it. If uncertainty persisted, they didn't wait for a perfect study. That choice, act early versus act after, shape what color your sports drink is and whether your pie crust relies on synthetic antioxidants or vitamin E. This decision would haunt brand managers because dual recipes aren't just a regulatory headache, they're a reputational risk. Once consumers see side-by-side labels, why not sell the cleaner version here? Becomes a weekly email in corporate inboxes. Internally, spreadsheets split SKUs by market, suppliers quote different emulsifiers, and procurement juggles availability when state bans leapfrog federal approval. In the aftermath of rising state action, California's Food Safety Act, new FDA reviews, companies started to pivot, but reformulations cost money. Contracts with co-packers, print runs for packaging, and global supply chains don't turn on a dime, so you get a strange limbo. Cleaner cans abroad, legacy stock at home. Shoppers assume a brand is a brand. It is. To understand why your cereal aisle looks different in London, go back to incentives. If an additive makes distribution cheaper and regulators don't force change, it stays. If a government demands a warning or bans it, the recipe changes, just not everywhere. And if a parent reads a caution label overseas, then sees none at home, trust erodes. Here's where we go next. Let's start where your day starts, breakfast. We'll open boxes you've known since kindergarten and show you how the rainbow gets made, why some countries add a sentence to the front, and what that missing sentence means at your table. Breakfast betrayal. Cereals, creamers, and colors. Breakfast looks harmless until you read the fine print. Start with the bowl kids beg for Froot Loops. In the US, the colors come from red 40 and yellow 5 and 6. They brighten the cereal in the morning, but they also trigger a different response overseas. In much of Europe, those same hues either come with a front-of-pack warning that they may affect activity and attention in children, or they're replaced with plant-based color extracts. The box still features the same mascot. The difference is a line of text, or an absence of certain dyes that quietly hands power back to parents. Here's why that matters. The stakes at 7 a.m. aren't abstract. If a child is sensitive to synthetic dyes, breakfast can set the tone for the school day. Teachers see it first. Fidgeting focus slips the note home. In the US, there's no warning to weigh before you pour. In the EU, the label forces a tiny pause. That pause is the point. Action. Kellogg's and others have long relied on BHT for freshness in American cereals, a synthetic antioxidant tucked near the end of the ingredient list. It slows rancidity and extends shelf life. Abroad, limits and consumer pressure push brands toward different preservation methods or cleaner formulations. You'll still find sweetened loops in a London shop, but the colors look a bit less like crayons, and the preservative line often reads differently. Impact. The cereal tastes the same to most kids, but the exposure profile changes, and so does the decision a parent gets to make. Now pour a second bowl, Lucky Charms. In the US, the marshmallows glow with red 40 and yellow 5 and 6. In parts of Europe, the dyes shift toward beet, paprika, or carrot concentrates, or the package carries that behavior warning. Same leprechaun, 2 recipes. The emotional math is simple. Is the bright color worth the question mark? In many countries, regulators decided parents deserve that question right on the front. Meanwhile, something else is happening on the counter. Coffee creamer slides in as the adult upgrade. For years, popular creamers built their texture with partially hydrogenated oils, the industrial trans fats the WHO says have no safe level. US rules phased them out by 2018, but the legacy is confusion. Shelves still carry a maze of formulations, powdered, refrigerated, seasonal flavors, private labels. Action. A shopper grabs what looks familiar. Impact. Unless they check, they may miss newer oils, added emulsifiers, or stabilizers like Carrageenan that some consumers try to avoid. Abroad, the path to reformulation was earlier and cleaner in many markets. Here, the history lingers in old habits and brand trust. Get this, Pop-Tarts sit at the crossroads of dessert and breakfast. In US kitchens, frosted strawberry means red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6 in the icing and filling. In Europe, the same flavor often leans on natural color extracts, or the hue is toned down. Action. A kid opens a box in an airport lounge, 2 countries printed on identical packaging. In one, the pastry looks like a bakery pink. In the other, it shines like nail polish. The impact is subtle but real. A dye you don't need becomes a daily staple because convenience is king at 6:45 a.m. Here's a micro story. A school nurse in Sacramento keeps a drawer of behavior notes. After a classroom birthday, a 7-year-old spirals restless, tears, a call home. The teacher mentions red icing and special cereal. The parent shrugs. It was a treat. That night they Google the label. The next week they test dye-free cereal. The notes slow down. That family isn't a study. It's a pattern echoed in state toxicology reports that say some children are more sensitive and benefit when dyes drop. Practical reality. You can find EU-style swaps domestically if you look. Some cereals advertise colors from natural sources. Ingredient lines mention spirulina extract, turmeric, annatto, beet juice concentrate. For preservatives, look for tocopherols or rosemary extract instead of BHT or BHA. If a box still says BHT for freshness, that's the flag. For Pop-Tarts, scan for paprika oleoresin and vegetable juice color instead of the numbered like dyes. The flavor won't vanish, the glow will. And coffee, 2 quick checks. 1. Skip any creamer with hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated in the oils, even if the front says 0 trans fat. Serving size games can hide small amounts. 2. If Carrageenan bothers your stomach or you just want to avoid it, choose creamers that use gel and gum or go simple. Milk, half and half, or shelf-stable options that list milk, cream, sugar, and not much else. Abroad, many mainstream creamers moved off the old fats years earlier. In the US, brand families are big and inconsistent. Read the back, not the billboard. Meanwhile, cereal makers in Europe added one more twist, warning labels tied to specific dyes. That single sentence turns a passive purchase into an active choice. In the US, advocacy groups pushed regulators to follow suit. States started to listen. You'll see bills targeting synthetic dyes in school foods and calls for clearer disclosures. Until policy catches up, your best leverage is the scanner in your hand. So when breakfast turns neon pause, ask what the color does other than sell the box. Ask why the same brand tones it down when a regulator asks, but not when you do. Then try the A-B swap, 1 week with the legacy label, 1 week with the dye-free version. Track sleep, focus, and the number of notes that come home in the backpack. For many families, that's all the evidence they needed to make the change stick. Bottled glow. Sodas, sports, and energy drinks. Snacks got loud, but bottles got brighter. Walk into any gas station and the cold case looks like a light show. Here, S where labels split hardest. Same can, 2 recipes, the stakes aren't abstract. This is what teens chug before practice, what travelers grab between gates, and what late shift workers lean on at 2 a.m. Start with the old lightning rod, citrus sodas. For decades, some U.S. formulas used brominated vegetable oil to keep flavor oils from separating. Abroad, the ingredient disappeared years ago. Japan banned it in the 1970s. The EU kept it out. The US only revoked authorization recently, and you still see legacy stock on certain shelves. Action. One consumer buys a bottle in Berlin, no BVO. Their cousin buys the same brand in Boise and checks an older lot. There it is. Impact. The product identities match, but the chemistry doesn't, and trust takes a hit when people compare. Meanwhile, something else was glowing. Sports drinks built a brand on color. That neon isn't hydration, it's dyes like yellow 5 and yellow 6. In Europe, the presence of specific synthetic colors can trigger a warning that they may affect activity and attention in children, which pushes brands to mute the palate or switch to plant-derived colorings. In the US, the bottle still beams from across the aisle. Action. A coach tosses a crate onto the bench. Kids pick by color. Impact. Most never see the dye line on the back panel. And parents never get the front-of-pack nudge they'd see overseas. There's a second layer. Titanium dioxide, a whitening and brightness agent used to make colors pop and coatings look uniform. The EU banned it in foods after safety authorities said they couldn't rule out genotoxicity. Here, the review pace is slower. Some states signal they might act. Many companies quietly reformulate specific candies and drinks. The shelf result is confusing. 2 identical packages, one with TO2 gone, one still using it until inventory's clear. If you're not label fluent, you'd never know the difference. Here's a micro story. A traveler lands at Heathrow, grabs a familiar citrus soda, and notices the ingredient list looks shorter. Same afternoon, they connect through Atlanta, buy the same brand, and see a different additive list. They hold the cans side by side at the gate like they're comparing counterfeit bills. The shock isn't the science. It's the realization that geography changed the recipe more than branding ever did. Energy drinks raise the stakes. In the US, a single can pack the caffeine of 3 strong coffees, plus extras like guarana and taurine. Teens can buy them without anyone asking for ID. Overseas, it gets tighter. Some countries cap caffeine per serving, require age gates, or mandate prominent labels. Action. A 16-year-old in Paris asks for an energy drink at a store. The clerk asks for proof of age. The same kid visits a cousin in Phoenix and loads a case into the cart unnoticed. Impact. Behavior around the product changes because the rules changed first. Let's talk formulas. Abroad, brands often reduce caffeine to meet caps and adjust sweeteners to local laws. In the US, the max hit positioning still sells. The marketing leans on focus, power, and performance. It rarely mentions milligrams per serving on the front. If you scan the nutrition label, you'll find it, but the number means little until you compare it to your daily coffee habit. Meanwhile, emergency rooms keep a quiet tally of caffeine-related incidents among youth. Doctors warn, packaging shines. Now layer in sweeteners and acids. Many U.S. sodas rely on high-fructose corn syrup, backed by cheap corn economics. In Europe, formulas lean on beet or cane sugar. The taste difference is subtle to some, obvious to others. The metabolic story is broader. Added sugars across many products, not just soda. But the formula split reinforces the theme. Can hide a policy choice as much as a flavor choice. Practical checks make this straightforward. On citrus sodas, scan for brominated vegetable oil. Older lots may still show it. On bright drinks, look for titanium dioxide, yellow 5, yellow 6, red 40. On sports drinks, count caffeine if present and look for colors from natural sources. On energy drinks, find the caffeine per serving and multiply by servings per can. If it lists 150 mg per serving and there are 2 servings, that's 300 mg. Decide if you drink 3 coffees in 10 minutes. Most people wouldn't. A can disappears faster than a mug. Meanwhile, something else is happening behind the scenes. Logistics reward long shelf life and uniform color. Retailers like predictable rotations. Brands like national launches that don't spoil in hot warehouses. A stabilizer that keeps citrus flavors homogeneous and a dye that holds its glow make planning simple. When regulators abroad remove the option, companies adapt. When regulators at home move slower, legacy formulas linger because inertia is cheap. Here, that's where it gets personal. A parent switches their kid from neon sports drink to a clear version with the same electrolytes. The kid shrugs after practice and drinks it. A student trading energy drinks for coffee starts sleeping again. A frequent flyer picks the non-dyed lemon seltzer instead of the highlighter yellow soda and doesn't miss it after a week. None of these are hero moves. They're small swaps. But small swaps add up when they're daily. The glow sells the story. The label tells the truth. Read the back. Compare across borders when you can. And if the same brand sells a toned-down version overseas, ask for it here. Companies already know how to make it. They're just waiting for a reason. Snack swap. Crackers, chocolates, and candy tricks. Snacks look friendlier than bottles, but the labels play the same game. Quiet chemistry where you'd expect pantry staples. Start with crackers. Ritz and Wheat Thins built their reputations on a buttery crunch and a better choice vibe. What keeps that taste consistent month after month isn't just flour and oil. For years, U.S. boxes leaned on preservatives like BHT, sometimes flagged on pack as added to packaging to preserve freshness, which sounds harmless until you realize the goal is shelf life, not flavor. In Europe and Japan, tighter limits and bans pushed manufacturers toward alternatives to tocopherols, rosemary extract, different fats. The cracker still snaps, the preservative story changes. Here, why that matters. The stakes sit in the pantry door where kids grab a quick snack and adults assume plain means simple. You don't expect a synthetic antioxidant debate in a rectangle of wheat. Action, a shopper tosses in a family-sized box before a road trip. Impact. Weeks later, the crackers taste identical because chemistry kept the oils from turning, but the US version often took the long way around the problem, while overseas versions solved it with cleaner option. Meanwhile, chocolate tells a different kind of truth. Mass-market bars in the US often rely on an emulsifier called PGPR, polyglycerol polyrisinolate, to keep viscosity low so the chocolate flows through pipes and molds with less cocoa butter. It's a cost-saving move. The label doesn't say we swapped some cocoa butter. It just lists PGPR near the end. Overseas, the bar may use less of it or none at all, leaning on higher cocoa content or different emulsifiers under stricter limits and clearer labeling. The taste test isn't dramatic. The ingredient philosophy is. Here's the stakes in chocolate form. Cocoa butter is pricey and volatile. PGPR is predictable. Action. A global candy brand calibrates formulas by market. US plant runs push PGPR to hit price points. European runs dial it back and push cocoa percentage higher to meet consumer expectations. Impact. The same wrapper signals different choices about what chocolate should be: rich and short ingredient, or stretched and stabilized. For a holiday box, that trade-off is invisible unless you read the microscopic print. Now the candy aisle goes loud. Skittles still sell the rainbow, but the rainbow isn't the same everywhere. US bags list dyes like yellow 5, yellow 6, and red 40. Until recently, some candies used titanium dioxide to sharpen whites and brightness. The European Union banned TO2 in foods after its safety panel couldn't rule out genotoxicity. Result: reformulations across the block. In the US, reviews move slower and state efforts nudge brands, so you end up with two timelines: rapid changes abroad, staggered changes at home. The bag design barely shifts, the molecules do. Maraschino cherries are the quiet companion to that story. On sundaes and in cocktails, the neon red comes from synthetic dye, most often red 40 in American jars. European versions increasingly use natural colors or carry stricter labeling. Action: a bar manager in Dublin orders cocktail cherries that look deep, not fluorescent. A cousin in Denver grabs the bright red jar that looks like holiday lights. Impact: same garnish idea, different color chemistry, and a different regulatory attitude toward what sits in a kid's ice cream bowl. Little Debbie Swiss rolls sit at the intersection of comfort and convenience. The US version lists artificial colors and a roster of stabilizers to keep the swirl pretty and the cake soft through long storage. Abroad, recipes lean simpler or disclose warnings where dyes apply. The memory is the same, the ingredient panel is. Here's a micro story. A headline says candy lawsuit over toxic additive. Click through and the settlement changes a coding ingredient while the product stays on shelves with new fine print. A parent glances at the headline and thinks the brand cleaned up entirely. They never check the label. The additive they worried about isn't the only one worth watching. Lawsuits make noise, ingredient lines whisper. So what do you do in the snack aisle without moving countries? Practical swaps are real and easy. Crackers: choose versions preserved with tocopherols or rosemary extract. Skip boxes listing BHT or BHA. Some brands quietly offer parallel, simple lines, same crunch, shorter list. Chocolate: pick higher cocoa percentages and bars without PGPR. Simple ingredient lists: cocoa mass, cocoa butter, sugar, vanilla. Signal you're paying for chocolate, not process aids. Candy: look for colors from natural sources and avoid TO2 on the label. If the white looks snow bright, flip the bag. Plant-based whites look softer. Cherries: find jars colored with fruit or vegetable extracts. The red looks less electric, the label reads cleaner. Snack cakes: if you want the spiral, choose smaller packs and fresher dated options to avoid heavy preservation. Or switch to bakery versions where possible. While that was happening on shelves, something else was happening in shipping pallets. Retailers reward long-dated goods. National promotions need identical product in January and June. A preservative that buys 6 extra weeks or an emulsifier that tolerates heat spikes in transit is worth real money. That incentive doesn't go away until policy, retailer standards, or consumer demand pushes back. There's another lever: your own A/B test. Buy the EU-leaning version of a product when available domestically. Many mainstream brands now sell no artificial colors, candy lines, and simple crackers. Run them side by side with your usual. Action: host a living room taste test. Don't tell anyone which is which. Impact: if nobody notices, you just moved your cart without losing the treat. The trick in candy tricks isn't that companies can't make cleaner snacks, they already do. It's that they won't swap the default recipe until someone forces the spreadsheet. A short ingredient list is a vote they understand. A photo of a US label next to its EU twin is a reputational risk they notice. The aisle won't change overnight, but the way you shop can, and brands follow carts faster than they follow petitions. Pantry classics: stuffing, pie crusts, and mixes. From the snack aisle, take 3 steps to the holiday shelf. Boxes you've trusted for decades sit there like old friends. The labels tell a different story. Start with stove-top stuffing. The promise is simple: boil water, fluff with a fork, call it a side. Hidden in that convenience are synthetic antioxidants, BHA and sometimes BHT, there to keep fats from going rancid while those boxes wait weeks or months to be cooked. That line near the bottom of the ingredient panel buys time in warehouses, not flavor at your table. Here, why that matters. Holidays compress time and stress. You grab what works because guests are walking in and the turkey timer is shouting. The stakes are in the default. If the default relies on preservatives flagged by other countries, you'll never know unless you flip the box. Action. A shopper loads 3 boxes into a cart the Sunday before Thanksgiving. Impact. The meal tastes like memory, but the ingredients follow an American rulebook many trading partners rejected years ago. In the EU and Japan, restrictions pushed brands toward alternatives. Some recipes abroad lean on tocopherols, vitamin E, or reformulate the fat blend entirely. The breadcrumb texture stays, the additive story shifts. Meanwhile, pie crusts tell the same tale. Pillsbury's refrigerated rounds promise bakery results in 10 minutes. Alongside flour and fat, the label often lists BHA and BHT, again, synthetic antioxidants to keep oils stable through the cold chain and in your fridge. The logic is industrial. Crusts travel far, sit in cases, and need to roll out the same every time. Abroad, you'll see tocopherols or natural antioxidants in similar products or simpler ingredient lists that trade longer dating for cleaner labels. Action. A parent unrolls a crust while kids slice apples. Impact. The filling is orchard fresh. The crust is chemistry aided. If you don't read the back, you'd never guess. Now pivot to the baking aisle. Mixes that promise fudgy, chewy, perfect every time. Boxed brownies earned that reputation with fats that behave and a batter that forgives. Historically, that meant partially hydrogenated oils, industrial trans fats now pushed out by the WHO and eliminated from U.S. foods by rule after 2018. The legacy remains in how these mixes are engineered. Emulsifiers, stabilizers, and oils chosen for stability first. Overseas, the reformulation story started earlier for many brands. Here, it's patchwork by product line, distributor, and date code. Action. A college student grabs a mix at midnight during finals. Impact. The pan comes out perfect. The ingredient list reads like a lab manual compared to a bakery recipe. Not all colors are in the toy cereal bowl. Raspberry gelatin sits on the same shelf, loud and playful, driven by Red 40 in US boxes. European versions often move to beetroot or carmine in certain markets, or at least carry clearer warnings when synthetic dyes appear. The wobble is the same. The label tells 2 different stories about how much glow belongs in dessert. Here's a micro story from the aisle. 2 regions, 1 holiday. In Manchester, a traveler pushes a trolley past a stuffing mix that calls out antioxidants from rosemary extract. In Miami, their sister FaceTimes from the Thanksgiving aisle, holding the same brand name with BHA and BHT added to preserve freshness on the back. They laugh, then get quiet. The family table looks the same on both sides of the ocean. The recipes don't. So what's actually happening under the hood? Shelf life economics. A preservative that buys 12 extra weeks means a manufacturer can run fewer changeovers, ship farther with fewer losses, and guarantee promotion windows months ahead. Retailers like the certainty. The chemistry becomes infrastructure. When another country bans or restricts an additive, the company already knows how to live without it. They've done it elsewhere. But reformulating every market means retooling suppliers, reprinting cartons, retraining co-packers. If the US doesn't force it, spreadsheets decide it's not urgent. There's a practical way through this without gutting your holiday plan. Stuffing. Scan for BHA or BHT. If they show up, look for versions preserved with tocopherols or rosemary extract. Many store brands quietly shifted. Or build a 5-ingredient version with day-old bread, onions, celery, butter, broth. It takes more chopping than chemistry. Pie crusts. Plenty of refrigerated and frozen crusts now label no BHA, BHT, or simple ingredient. If you have 15 minutes, a homemade crust with flour, butter, salt, water beats the list, and you can freeze discs ahead. Brownie mix. Check the fat source. No hydrogenated anything, and shorter lists tend to bake just as well. Some brands market no artificial preservatives. They're not always more expensive when on sale. One more quiet additive worth spotting in baking and dessert mixes. Titanium dioxide sometimes shows up to whiten or brighten coatings and fillings. The EU banned it in foods over genotoxicity concerns. Here, reviews continue, and some brands removed it product by product. If you see TO2 on a dessert mix or icing, you have options. Many lines now avoid it and look only slightly less brilliant on the plate. A bigger point, your pantry staples aren't stuck. The industry already runs clean recipes for export. You can align your cart with those by choosing the SKUs that brag about natural antioxidants and colors from vegetable sources. If the box you love hasn't caught up, write the brand. When enough people ask why the EU label looks cleaner than the US one, procurement notices. Holidays are traditions built on repetition. Labels are habits built on incentives. You don't need to rewrite the menu to change the math. Swap the preservative, keep the taste. Trade the glow for the flavor. And when you see "for freshness" on the back, read it as an invitation. There's a version of this that stays fresh without the asterisk. Frozen favorites. Ice cream cones and stabilizers. Freezer doors feel safe. Everything's cold, sealed, and ready when the craving hits. But the label math doesn't stop just because it's summer. The same split we've been tracing, cleaner abroad, chemical shortcuts at home, shows up in frozen desserts, and the quiet star of that story is Carrageenan. Here, why this matters. The stakes live in small rituals. The drumstick after a ball game, the pint for movie night, the cone from the corner mart when the heat won't break. These aren't laboratory meals. They're rewards. That's exactly why additives hide so comfortably here. Nobody expects to parse seaweed chemistry in a waffle cone. Action first. Carrageenan comes from red seaweed. In ice cream, cones with fillings and dipped novelties, it acts like a stabilizer, holding water and fat together so the texture stays creamy, resisting ice crystals and surviving thoroughfreeze shocks in transit. That's the warehouse logic. Cones bounce through hot trucks, store freezers cycle, displays open and shut. Without a stabilizer, the indulgence can turn grainy. With it, the product looks perfect weeks later. Impact depends on where you shop. In the US, Carrageenan shows up across dairy desserts, pints, soft-serve mixes, chocolate milks, creamers, and those nostalgic cones crowned with a chocolate cap and peanuts. Abroad, regulators narrowed the lanes, especially for vulnerable groups. The European Union restricts Carrageenan in infant formula because of digestive sensitivity concerns, and several markets pressure brands to reformulate where feasible. The tone isn't panic, it's precaution. If there's uncertainty for some consumers, cut exposure where you can. Meanwhile, something else was happening in research. Lab studies and animal models raised flags about inflammation in the gut and cell-level irritation, with debates over degraded versus undegraded forms and what actually ends up in food. Scientists don't agree on every mechanism, and not every study applies evenly to people. But the pattern was enough for some jurisdictions to draw fences around how and where Carrageenan gets used. This was the moment everything changed for a lot of parents. A kid ends a hot day with a cone, then spends the evening complaining about a stomachache. It happens once, nobody thinks about it. It happens a few times, and someone flips the sleeve to the ingredient list. They see Carrageenan, then start noticing it on the creamer, the chocolate milk, the pudding cups. That's the human entry point, not a journal article, a pattern at home. Microstory, July, County Pool. A dad buys 2 drumstick-style cones. One kid wolfs it down and jumps back in. The other sits out, clutching their belly. On the walk to the car, the dad checks the wrapper, Carrageenan. A week later, he tests a different brand that leans on guar and locust bean gum instead. The kid eats, swims, no complaints. It's not peer-reviewed. It's persuasive enough for that family. Let's get specific about the freezer case. If you're holding a cone with a chocolate-dipped top and a filled core, read 2 spots, the ice cream portion and the chocolatey shell. Carrageenan tends to appear in the dairy portion. Some brands also add mono and diglycerides and polysorbate 80 for smoothness and melt control. In pints, premium lines often skip Carrageenan entirely by raising fat and solids and using classic stabilizers like guar and locust bean gum. Middle-tier products juggle cost and texture with blends. Bargain tubs lean hard on gums because water is cheaper than cream. Abroad, the playbook shifts. Labels call out no Carrageenan, or the stabilizer list is shorter, relying more on locust bean and guar, or none at all for high-fat formulas. The mouthfeel changes slightly, softer at higher temperatures, a little more melt around the edges, but the trade-off is fewer questions about digestive effects. In the US, many mainstream brands already make these cleaner formulas for export. They just don't default to them here unless they're launching a natural subline. Meanwhile, retailer standards are starting to matter. Some grocers set ingredient bans or avoid lists for their private labels, Carrageenan included, quietly creating a parallel market where the same style of cone or pint skips the seaweed stabilizer. If you only ever buy national brands, you might miss this shift. Store brands often lead on reformulation because they can change one supplier and update a whole shelf. Practical choices are straightforward. If Carrageenan bothers you, or you'd rather not roll the dice, look for these tells. Pints that list milk, cream, sugar, egg yolks, and 1 or 2 traditional gums instead of long stabilizer blend. Novelties that swap Carrageenan for guar or locust bean gum, or that rely on higher fat to carry texture. Chocolate-dipped cones that call out "no Carrageenan" near the nutrition box. Some do. Dairy-free options that keep gums minimal. Oat-based desserts can be creamy without a chemical parade when fat and solids are dialed in. Here's where the economics show through. Stabilizers are cheap insurance. They let manufacturers ride warmer trucks, fewer spoilage claims, and longer reset cycles. When a regulator forces a switch, companies adjust. When nobody does, spreadsheets win. That's not villainy, it's logistics. But once you know the lever, you can pull it from your side of the door. One more note on labels. Natural flavor and chocolatey shell aren't the giveaways here. The giveaway is the mid-list parade: Carrageenan, polysorbate 80, mono and diglycerides, cellulose gum. Shorter lists with familiar words usually mean the brand is paying for cream and time, not texture tricks. Yes, you'll pay a little more. You are buying a treat anyway. Make it the one with fewer asterisks. The freezer case doesn't have to be a chemistry quiz. It can be a quick scan and a small swap. The cone your kid won't notice, the pint your guests finish without reading, the summer tradition built on cream instead of compromise. And if your favorite brand sells a Carrageenan-free version in another country, ask them why you can't get it here. They already know how to make it. They're waiting for your email to justify the change. Protein wars, farms, feed, and chemical edges. And then there's meat, the aisle where the split stops being about color and starts being about biology. The stakes are dinner plate big. What ends up in your skillet, what residues are allowed in your food, and why exporters run 2 supply chains to survive. Start with Ractopamine. In U.S. feedlots and hog barns, it's pitched as an efficiency tool, an additive mixed into feed that encourages lean muscle. The action is simple. Producers add it near the end of an animal's growth cycle. Carcasses grade leaner, yields rise. But overseas, the reception froze the moment regulators weighed uncertainties. More than 100 countries, including the EU, China, and Russia, shut the door. Their logic wasn't theatrical. They looked at animal studies tying the drug to stress responses and behavior changes, and they chose the safer lane. Impact. American packers created a forked system. One line, certified Ractopamine-free, moves to export markets. The other feeds domestic shelves. Same brand logos in both cases, different feed histories behind the label. Here's a micro story from a loading dock in the Midwest. A plant manager holds a clipboard with 2 columns. Column A shipments need Ractopamine-free affidavits signed by farmers and verified down the chain. Column B goes to domestic grocers, no affidavits required. A driver asks which pallet goes where. The manager taps the paper, not the packages. Labels won't tell the difference. Paperwork does. Meanwhile, poultry turned into a philosophy fight. American processors manage bacterial risk at the end of the line with antimicrobial rinses, most commonly chlorine-based washes. It's an industrial solution to an industrial problem. Birds move fast, contamination happens, you hit it with a chemical safety net. Across the Atlantic, the EU refused that premise. They wanted cleanliness designed into the farm and facility, slower lines, stricter hygiene, preventive controls, so the rinse wasn't needed. Action: 2 systems diverged. Impact. Chlorine-washed chicken became a trade debate shorthand, not because trace residues were dramatic, but because the methods signaled what kind of risk management each side believed in. While that was happening in poultry plants, dairy drew a red line around hormones. In the U.S., recombinant bovine somatotropin, RB-Cent, was approved in the 90s to boost milk output. The on-farm math favored efficiency. Cows produced more with the same feed base. Abroad, the calculus added animal welfare and a precautionary stance. The EU and Canada kept RB-Cent out, citing increased rates of udder infections in treated cows and questions around elevated IGF-1 in milk. Impact at home. Grocery cases turned into a trust referendum. From cows not treated with RB-Cent, labels spread, retailer standards shifted supply, and by the mid-2001s, only a minority of U.S. dairies still used it. The carton looks the same. The sourcing promise became a line of copy shoppers hunt for. Now zoom back to the farm. These aren't villains in coveralls. They're operators pinned between razor-thin margins and contracts that reward uniformity. Ractopamine improves feed conversion. Chlorine washes cut recalls. RB-Cent stretches output. The incentives point one direction until a regulator or buyer points another. Export bans created real leverage. If a country buys half your pork only when it's drug-free, you invent a drug-free line. If a retailer refuses hormone-treated milk, you change your co-op's policy. It's not a moral awakening, it's math. There's a second, quieter driver: logistics. National chains need meat that behaves identically from Miami to Minneapolis. Feed additives and processing aids shave variability. That predictability is worth money when you're scheduling thousands of stores and millions of meals. When the EU won't accept the aid, companies write a new playbook. When the US still does, the old playbook survives. Here's where a consumer can move the needle. Look for cues the paperwork lives behind the scenes. Pork labeled ractopamine-free or raised without the use of ractopamine exists because export markets force the certification. Some of that supply lands domestically. Beef programs with third-party verification, global animal partnership, certified humane, EU-compliant, signal a chain of custody that had to clear stricter filter. Chicken won't advertise chlorine washed, but air-chilled and no antimicrobial rinses, callouts show up on some labels, mostly from producers who build cleanliness upstream. Dairy that says, from cows not treated with arbicin, is everywhere now. Pick it and you reinforce the shift that retailers already demanded. Microstory: a shopper in Seattle grabs 2 packs of pork chops. One carries a small seal, EU export eligible. The other doesn't. Same price today because of a promotion. They text a photo to their group chat. Within a week, 3 friends start hunting for the same seal. The store notices the movement on that SKU and reorders heavier. Procurement reads the sales report and moves volume. The label didn't scream. The cart did. Meanwhile, state-level nudges are starting to mirror export pressure. School districts specify no arbicin for milk contracts. Some public buyers favor ractopamine-free pork. It's not a ban, it's a bid spec, and it reshapes supply just as effectively. Companies already know how to meet the standard, they just need the order to justify the cost. Let's be practical. If you want meat aligned with a stricter recipe, pork scanned for ractopamine-free, never fed ractopamine, or programs selling into China EU markets. Butchers often know which lines qualify. Chicken, air-chilled producers tend to emphasize upstream hygiene. Look for processors that describe no chemical rinses or use parasitic acid alternatives sparingly. EU origin imports use different systems altogether. Dairy: choose cartons labeled from cows not treated with arbicin and prefer co-ops and brands with published sourcing standards. Beef: it's tougher on pack. Look for EU-certified plants or third-party programs with export footprints. The protein wars aren't abstract. They're the fork in the road between 2 philosophies and 2 spreadsheets. One waits for perfect proof, then acts. The other acts when uncertainty could matter for families and trade. Your choice at the meat case tells packers which column to grow, and they adjust faster than you think. Bread codes: Bromates, conditioners, and yoga mats. Bread feels simple: flour, water, yeast, salt. Then you turn the bag over and meet the secret language of industrial baking. The stakes are daily. Sandwiches for kids, buns at cookouts, rolls on weeknights. If an additive shows up in something this ordinary, it touches almost everyone. Start with the booster most Americans never learned to pronounce: potassium bromate. In big bakeries, it's used as a dough improver, strengthens gluten, helps loaves rise higher, bakes up fluffy and uniform. That uniformity is the business model. The problem is what scientists saw in animal studies: bromate linked to tumors, with trace residues sometimes surviving baking when dosed or baked improperly. Abroad, that was enough to close the door. The EU, Canada, China, India, Brazil off the table. In the US, the response was softer. Guidance to avoid when possible, voluntary phase-outs, and for years a quiet status quo. State pressure finally cracked it. California listed bromate under Prop 65 and later moved to ban it from food sold in state. The industry knows how to bake without it. They've been doing that for export for decades. Action looks like this. A commercial line mixing thousands of pounds of dough per hour needs consistency. Bromate gives headroom on proof times and handling. Bakers swap it out by shifting to unbromated flour, lengthening fermentation, improving oxidation with ascorbic acid, or using enzyme systems. It's doable. It costs planning. Impact: the loaf in your cart can be bromate-free without you tasting a difference, but the label is the only way to know. Meanwhile, something else was hiding in a different corner of the bakery: azodicarbonamide, ADA. It's a fast-acting oxidizer and dough conditioner that bleaches flour, tightens dough, and keeps factory lines running smoothly. You've heard the nickname, The yoga mat chemical, because ADA also shows up in foamed plastics. The issue regulators focused on wasn't the foam. It was what ADA can break down into when heated, compounds like semicarbazide and urethane that raised red flags in lab tests. The EU and Australia banned ADA from foods outright. In the US, it remained permitted within limits, even as some chains voluntarily removed it after public pressure. In headlines, Arby's sourdough became a shorthand, same sandwich name, 2 recipes by market. Here's a micro story from a bakery floor. A veteran mixer watches dough develop in a steel bowl the size of a hot tub. He can tell by the stretch when gluten's right. One day, the plant transitions to unbromated, no ADA specs for an export run. The dough feels weaker, slower. He tweaks water, rests the dough longer, raises the fermentation room a couple of degrees. By lunch, the line is back on pace. The bread tastes the same. What changed was time, not flavor. Why did these additives stick in the US longer? Shelf life economics and line efficiency. Bromate cushions process variation. ADA speeds conditioning so proof boxes can be shorter and schedules tighter. When every minute on a line prints money, a chemical that buys predictability wins until a regulator or a big buyer says no. Then the process adapts. Stakes for families aren't dramatic in a single slice. They're cumulative. Bread is daily. If there's a cleaner path that bakers already use abroad, it's fair to ask for it here. The human reaction is simple. People assume whole grain, multigrain, or artisan means additive-free. Sometimes it does. Sometimes the front says rustic and the back says E-numbers by another name. Practical checks help. Flip the bag and scan for potassium bromate, bromated flour, or E924. If you see it, put it back. Many national brands now use unbromated flour. For conditioners, look for azodicarbonamide or E927A. If it's on there, you can do better. Instead, pick loaves that list flour, water, yeast, salt, maybe sugar or oil, plus ascorbic acid or enzymes. Unbromated flour is a good sign. No dough conditioners is even better. Unknown to many shoppers, regional supermarket bakeries already run cleaner formulas for in-store breads. Short supply chains let them skip some crutches. Longer fermentation, preferments, or sourdough starters build strength naturally. Independent bakeries take that further, unbleached, unbromated flours, no ADA, and time doing the work that chemicals try to replace. The price per loaf is higher, but so is the ingredient transparency. Now, fast food and factory loaves aren't the only bread story. Buns, tortillas, and flatbreads often carry the same aids. That ingredient line, flour conditioners, oxidizers, emulsifiers, exists to keep bread soft on day 30. Abroad, softness gets traded for cleaner labels or managed with enzymes and better packaging. In the US, softness wins by default because logistics demand it. Here, where retailer standards move mountains. A national grocer that specifies no bromate, no ADA for private label forces mills and bakeries to line up. Once the supply exists, national brands quietly follow. It's already happening. Store brand artisan lines brag about unbromated flour and no conditioners. Those are export recipes in disguise. Micro story, a school lunch director bids out hamburger buns. The spec, unbromated flour, no ADA. The price comes back a penny higher per bun. She runs the numbers. Over a semester, it's a few $100s within the budget if they trim waste. They sign. A mill shifts a schedule. A bakery tweaks fermentation. Thousands of kids eat the cleaner bun next month and never notice. Procurement did. If you bake at home, you already have the blueprint. Time, not tricks. Unbleached, unbromated flour. A pinch of ascorbic acid if you want a lift. Autolyzed to strengthen gluten. Longer, cooler fermentation for flavor and structure. For the rest of us, the fix is a label habit. Pick unbromated. Skip ADA. Reward no dough conditioners. If a brand uses the export formula somewhere, ask them to sell it here. Bread isn't where you expect a fight, but it's where the philosophies collide. Speed versus patience, hazard lines versus risk math, spreadsheets versus starters. Your slice can still be soft. It just doesn't need the Fishy business. Salmon color and contaminant caution. While bread codes hide in fine print, the seafood case hides in plain sight color. Salmon looks like health, that blush to copper flesh, the promise of omega-3s, the weeknight fillet that makes dinner feel responsible. Here's the split most shoppers never hear. Wild salmon is pink because of what it eats. Farmed salmon is pink because of what it's fed. Steaks first, families buy with their eyes. If the fillet looks pale, they assume it's old or low quality. Processors know that, retailers know that, and fish farms plan around it. The appearance decides whether dinner is sold before anyone checks origin, feed, or additives. Meanwhile, regulators overseas tie color to a wider set of cautions, contaminants, antibiotics, and farm practices, while U.S. labels lean on a single word, Atlantic. Action behind the glow is straightforward. In the wild, salmon chase krill and small crustaceans rich in carotenoids, especially astaxanthin. The pigment binds in the muscle and gives that natural coral tone. On farms, fish eat pellets. To match consumer expectations, feed makers add astaxanthin, produced from microalgae or synthesized, to the pellet so the flesh colors as the fish grow. It isn't a flavor booster, it's an appearance guarantee calibrated with color chart. Farmers literally pick a target, shade from a fan deck, and adjust feed to hit it. Impact depends on where the fish goes. In U.S. markets, this practice is standard. The labeling might note color added through feed, but it rarely makes the front. Abroad, the conversation broadens quickly. Countries with tighter import scrutiny look not just at colorants, but at residues, farm density, and pathogen control. When regulators suspect overuse of antibiotics, they throttle supply. When contaminant levels raise flags, dioxins, PCBs, they impose testing or slow the border. The result is fewer shortcuts, more paperwork, and in some places, a preference for wild stocks over farmed imports. Meanwhile, something else is happening in cold water. Not all astaxanthin is equal. Natural sources from microalgae supply the same pigment that wild diets provide. Synthetic versions are engineered for scale. The health debate doesn't hinge on the pigment alone. Safety assessments have cleared astaxanthin in feed within set limits. But the larger farming system that requires pigment raises other questions. Crowded pens, sea lice treatments, escape risks, and what happens to the surrounding ecosystem. Here's a micro story. A shopper at a coastal market stands over two fillets. Both look like perfect salmon. The signs say Atlantic, Farm, Chile, and Sockeye Wild, Alaska. The prices aren't close. The clerk pulls a laminated sheet from under the counter, a color chart with numbered swatches. He points. Farmed fish aim for 28.30 on this scale. The shopper blinks. They were choosing paint chips for dinner and didn't know it. Now, contaminants. Farmed fish can concentrate persistent pollutants through feed inputs, especially when oils or meals carry legacy residues. Modern feed has improved, more plant proteins and trimmings, better sourcing, but oversight varies by country and company. Wild salmon pick up contaminants in food chains too, yet migratory patterns and species matter. Fatty, older fish store more. Regulators abroad often tie import approvals to tighter testing programs. And when unsure, pivot consumer guidance towards species and origins with cleaner profile. Antibiotics add another layer. High-density pens invite disease. Disease invites treatments. Some countries strictly control or publicly report antibiotic use. Others lag. Buyers in markets with stricter standards demand supplier certifications, third-party audits, and residue testing. Domestic labeling in the U.S. rarely tells that story on the foam tray. You'll see fresh, previously frozen, Atlantic, or Pacific, and sometimes a farm name if the brand is building trust. The supply chain knows more than the sticker says. Practical cues help. If you want wild, look for species names. Sockeye, coho, king, chinook, pink, chum. Atlantic almost always means farmed. Country of origin matters. US, Canada, Norway, Scotland, Chile, Faroe Islands, each with different farming standards and audit depth. Certifications: Aquaculture Stewardship Council, ASC. Best aquaculture practices, BAP with stars. Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch green ratings aren't perfect, but they indicate someone checked more than color. Microstory: 2 fillets on a cutting board at home. One labeled Farmed Atlantic, product of Norway, ASC certified. The other wild sockeye, product of USA. They look nearly identical. After cooking, the farmed is richer in texture but milder in taste. The sockeye tastes cleaner, denser, a touch leaner. The family agrees both are good. The tiebreaker becomes trust, a certification seal or a wild harvest note that means fewer question marks at the table. Meanwhile, retailers are setting quieter rules. Some chains publish seafood sustainability policies that restrict antibiotics and require third-party audits for farmed suppliers. Others highlight wild-caught seasons, pushing promotions that move buyers toward Alaskan runs when they're abundant. The shelf talks if you know what to listen for. Signage about responsibly farmed, no preventive antibiotics, traceable to farm, or certified sustainable. If you're thinking in swaps, try these. When wild is in season and priced close, pick it and batch cook. Fillets hold in the fridge for 3 days and freeze cleanly if wrapped well. When choosing farmed, prioritize countries with transparent standards and look for ASC or BAP 4-star. If you only see color added via feed and nothing else, ask the counter for country of origin and harvest method. If they don't know, consider a brand that prints it on pack. One last detail that pays off. Skin-on fillets reveal fat lines more clearly. Pronounced, creamy bands can mean higher fat, great for flavor, but also where lipophilic contaminants concentrate. Trimming belly fat is a simple hedge if you worry about residues without sacrificing the meal. The color sells the idea of salmon. The label tells the reality, species, source, and system. Pick by name, not just shade. Ask for the paperwork behind the pink. And remember, the industry already meets stricter bars abroad. Your question at the counter is often the nudge they need to bring those standards home. Fields of control. GM, papaya, and sweetener policy. While seafood hides color in plain sight, fruit and soda hide policy in every bite and sip. 2 quiet levers shape what lands in your bowl and glass. Whether a plant can be engineered to survive, and which sugar pays to sweeten everything else. Start with a fruit that saved a crop. In the 1990s, papaya farms in Hawaii were getting gutted by ring spot virus. Trees withered, families faced losing land. Scientists offered a fix, genetically engineered papaya varieties that carried resistance. Action on the ground looked humble. Farmers grafted, replanted, and watched new orchards live where old ones died. The impact was immediate. Yields returned, and over time, those GE varieties became the default for U.S. supply. If you bought fresh papaya in an American grocery, odds are it came from that rescue. Meanwhile, something else was happening across the Atlantic. The European Union built a stricter gate for genetically modified foods. The standard wasn't wait and see, it was prove it safe and label it. Without EU approvals for those disease-resistant papayas, the fruit didn't enter those markets, and any food with GM ingredients had to disclose it. So you get a split no sticker explains at home. In the US, GM papaya is routine and often unlabeled. In the EU, it's controlled or absent, and labeling tells you what you're buying. Here's the stakes. This isn't a cartoon villain. Ringspot wasn't going to negotiate. Farmers saw a choice between technology or collapse. The rescue worked. But the way markets responded shows the core disagreement we've been tracing: handle uncertainty up front or manage it after. In the US, the decision tilted toward keeping a domestic crop alive. In Europe, the decision tilted toward consumer disclosure and a higher bar for entry. Microstory: a traveler visits family on Oahu. At a roadside stand, the farmer talks about the bad years, then points to rows of healthy trees. "These kept us here," he says. Weeks later in Paris, the same traveler reads a grocery sign explaining GMO labeling rules and realizes the papaya they just ate back home wouldn't be on the shelf. 2 plates, 2 policies, 1 fruit. If the papaya story is about survival, the sweetener story is about scale. High fructose corn syrup didn't win because it tasted better. It won because the math made it everywhere. For decades, U.S. farm policy subsidized corn, stabilized supply, and kept inputs cheap. Action in factories looked like this. Syrup tankers backed up to bottling plants, and soda lines ran smooth because HFCS is easy to pump, blend, and price. On the shelf, a 2-liter stayed cheap, even when fuel was. Impact shows up in repetition. When a sweetener costs less, you use it more broadly. Sodas, sauces, breads, yogurts, snacks that don't taste sweet at all. Nutrition researchers don't pin metabolic disease on one molecule. They point to the volume of added sugars across the day. HFCS made it easy to add sugar-like sweetness everywhere without blinking at cost. Meanwhile, Europe ran a different play. For years, quotas and pricing systems limited HFCS-type syrups and favored beet or cane sugar. It wasn't a health crusade so much as a market design that prevented corn syrup from flooding recipes. The taste difference is subtle, but the policy difference is. Pick up the same brand soda in Mexico or much of Europe, and you'll see sugar on the label. In the US, HFCS is often the default. The can looks the same. What sweetens it reflects a government spreadsheet as much as a flavor lab. Here's a micro story you've heard at cookouts. Someone brings a glass bottle labeled Mexican Coke. They swear it tastes better. Part of that's the bottle, part is cane sugar instead of HFCS. Whether your tongue agrees isn't the point. The point is that the same brand sells multiple formulas calibrated to local economics and rules, not just to taste buds. Stakes for families are whether sugar is natural. It's how often you unwittingly buy added sugars because they're woven into foods that don't need them. On an ingredient list, HFCS blends into the middle. Corn syrup solids hide in places you'd never suspect. Abroad, sugar appears too, but a quota kept flood levels at bay, and labeling in some markets makes total sugar exposure easier to see. Practical cues help here. If you want to align with stricter or simpler recipes, Froot, if GMO labeling matters to you, look for papayas marked non-GMO or check country of origin. In the US, many Hawaiian papayas are GM, some Caribbean sources may not be. Frozen and canned often mix sources. Brand websites sometimes disclose more than labeled. Sodas scan for sugar versus high fructose corn syrup. Glass bottle imports often use cane sugar. Several US niche lines now do too. Pantry, sauces and bread frequently slip in HFCS. Alternate brands swap to sugar or just use less. Ingredient lines that say sugar, vinegar, spices, beet, corn syrup, HFCS, color added. Breakfast, flavored yogurt and granola bars are quiet sugar vehicles. Choose plain and sweeten at home, or pick versions with total sugar per serving that reads like a snack, not a dessert. Meanwhile, retailers are testing a different lever, added sugar caps for private labels and no HFCS house standards. If enough carts reward those SKUs, national brands take the hint. They already run sugar-based lines for export. Getting that recipe onto your shelf isn't a science problem, it's a sales report. Papaya and sweetener policy look small until you zoom out. One saved a crop, one saturated a culture. Both were choices first, ingredients second. If a label can tip those choices back toward you, that's where the power sits, on the line that decides what sweetness and what story you bring home. The A-B test. US label versus a EU label, same brand. Let's open the suitcase. Same brands, two passports. We'll lay the labels side by side and let the ink talk. First case pack, Froot Loops, Pop-Tarts, Skittles. The US Froot Loops box lists red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6, and often BHT for freshness. The European carton tones down the palette, colors from plant concentrates, or keeps synthetics under tighter limits, and if present, triggers that behavior warning about kids' activity and attention. Action, a parent in Boston flips the US box and sees a parade of die numbers. Their sister in Berlin flips the EU box and sees beetroot, spirulina, or carrot extracts. Impact. Both kids still chase Toucan Sam, but one set of parents gets a heads up before pouring. Now Pop-Tarts. Frosted strawberry in the US glows thanks to red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6. The EU version of the same flavor leans on paprika oleoresin, beet, or annatto, giving a softer pink. Action, airport lounge breakfast, two foils, two pastries, same brand. One icing looks bakery pale, the other shines like a candy aisle. Impact, identical ritual, different chemistry, and a small shift in exposure every school morning. Skittles complete the trio. US bags list yellow 5, yellow 6, red 40. Older runs included titanium dioxide in some candies to sharpen whites. The EU banned TO2 in foods, so European packs reformulated. Action, a traveler empties both bags on a hotel desk. The rainbow looks the same until you read the back. Impact, same slogan, taste the rainbow. Two recipes under the hood. Second case pack, Gatorade and Sunkist. In the US, those electric tones come from synthetic dyes. In many EU markets, brands reformulated with plant-derived colors or carry a mandatory warning if certain dyes remain. Action, a coach orders bottles for a tournament abroad. The delivery looks muted. The label spells out cautions. Back home, the neon glow returns, warning gone. Impact, the same hydration pitch reframed by a single sentence overseas. Third case pack, Ritz and wheat thins. US boxes historically relied on BHT to preserve oils and keep that crisp snap after months in a pantry. European counterparts pushed toward tocopherols or rosemary extract, with some markets barring BHT in those uses. Action, two sleeves open on a charcuterie board. Nobody tastes the preservative, everyone eats it. Impact, shelf life wins in one market, cleaner preservation wins in the other. Fourth case pack, Mountain Dew and Fresca. BVO stuck around in US citrus sodas until the recent federal revocation. Abroad, the switch happened years earlier. Action, identical cans, different timelines. Impact, the glow is branding, the stabilizer is policy, and geography decided the phase-out date. Fifth case pack, pie crust and brownie mix. US labels often show BHA, BHT, and crust fats and historically partially hydrogenated oils in mixes before the phase-out. European variants swap to vitamin E tocopherols, natural antioxidants, and different fat systems. Action: 2 boxes on a holiday aisle look like twins, only one lists synthetic antioxidants by name. Impact: both bake up golden, one recipe mirrors export rule. Here's a micro story from Customs. A traveler flies home with a suitcase of cleaner candy and cereal for friends. The agent opens the bag, scans the labels, and confiscates a few items because of additive rules in the other direction. Certain imports can't enter without approvals. Shock turns into curiosity. The traveler returns to the store the next day and starts photographing US-EU labels instead of hauling them. The photos get more traction than any souvenir ever did. So, how do you run your own A/B audit without an international flight? Practical steps: pick a brand that sells globally. Search the product page for ingredients, EU, or switch the site's country setting. Many multinationals publish regional labels. Compare colors. If the US lists red 40, yellow 5-6, blue 1, check whether the EU version lists plant concentrates or requires a child behavior warning when synthetics appear. Scan preservatives. In crackers, crusts, mixes, and stuffing, look for BHA, BHT in US labels versus tocopherols, rosemary extract abroad. Check stabilizers and whiteners. Note titanium dioxide on US candies or desserts, then confirm that the EU version removed it after the ban. Verify emulsifiers. In chocolate, flag PGPR in the US. See if EU bars push higher cocoa content and list fewer processed aids. Log caffeine. Energy drinks often show higher per serving amounts in US cans. EU labels mark caps and sometimes age gates. Photograph everything: front, back, and close-ups. Brands respond faster when the visual contrast is undeniable. While you do this, remember the system behind the differences. Companies aren't confused. They're compliant in 2 directions. They already engineered the clean version to satisfy stricter markets. The US keeps legacy formulas because no regulator or retailer forced the switch, and cost savings add up across every SKU. One more micro story from a brand office. A manager keeps a spreadsheet labeled dual recipe risk. Columns for dyes, preservatives, conditioners, whiteners, stimulants. They color code by region: green for removed abroad, yellow for under review, red for US-only exposure. Every time a state proposes a ban or a retailer tightens standards, cells change color and packaging timelines shuffle. The quiet fear isn't reformulation, it's the screenshot of 2 labels going viral. Run your A/B audit, post your side-by-sides, and send them to customer service with one line: sell us the EU recipe. You won't win every battle, but every photo chips away at the because we can column and adds weight to the because they asked one. The system: why shelf life beats health life. By now, the pattern is obvious. When regulators tighten abroad, brands adapt. When rules lag at home, legacy formulas linger. The question is why? The answer lives in spreadsheets, truck routes, and the quiet math of shelf life. Start with incentives. A product that lasts 26 weeks instead of 14 changes everything. It lowers returns, widens distribution, and lets national promotions run without fear of stale stock. That's real money. Synthetic antioxidants keep fats from turning. Brighteners keep coatings uniform after temperature swings. Dough conditioners cushion variation so a night shift can hit the same target as the day shift. None of this is about taste first. It's about making the calendar and the logistics work every single time. Meanwhile, corporate cost models reward cheap inputs that behave predictably. Cocoa butter prices spike. PGPR levels the tempering tank. Citrus oils separate. A stabilizer keeps them suspended through summer heat. A dye that never fades beats a plant color that wanders shade to shade. Consistency buys scale. Scale buys negotiating power. Health isn't ignored. It's assumed managed by the regulator. When the regulator hesitates, the default wins. Here, where regulatory lag sneaks in. In the US, the burden of proof leans on risk. Show harm at realistic exposures, then we'll act. Companies can declare substances, generally recognized as safe with expert panels, and in many cases, skip formal pre-market approval. That doesn't mean there's no science. It means the pipeline moves on industry timelines, and optional notifications don't always land on the FDA's desk first. Post-market reviews exist, but they're slow and resources are finite. States step in when headlines spark pressure, creating a patchwork. California here, New York there, while national rules take years to harmonize. Abroad, a different lever pulls earlier. If safety is uncertain, regulators narrow the lane, demand more data, or pull a substance off shelves until the case is stronger. Companies don't like delays either, so they reformulate to a conservative standard and keep moving. One global brand, two playbooks: precaution overseas, risk at home. Not because they love one consumer more, but because policy requires it. Here's a micro story from a brand floor. A reformulation team opens a project called Global Harmonization. The brief: align as many SKUs as possible to the strictest market without blowing up cost. The manager drags columns across a monitor: dyes, preservatives, conditioners, whiteners, caffeine. A few are easy: swap titanium dioxide out everywhere, tweak colors to plant sources on family packs, move crackers to tocopherol. Others are hard: unbromated flour means slower lines, different proofing, new supplier contracts. The CFO asks for a staged plan. Start where the cost delta is pennies, save the heavy lifts for when either a retailer demands it or a state sets a clock. The science isn't new, the timing is. Corporate calculus runs on three questions: what's legal, what's cheapest, what's safe enough to avoid reputational damage. Safe enough sits on shifting ground. A viral photo of two labels, a US list and an EU list, cuts through marketing faster than a press release. Retailers don't like being the villain in those screenshots. They write standards for private labels: no bromate, no ADA, no synthetic dyes, no Carrageenan. Suppliers grumble, then comply. 6 months later, national brands quietly mirror the change and call it innovation. Meanwhile, regulators are moving, just slower than headlines. Federal reviews reopened files on BVO, titanium dioxide, and synthetic dyes. Guidance tightens around exposure estimates. Committees revisit old studies and add newer ones. It doesn't feel like action to a parent reading a label on Saturday, but inside agencies it's a grind: risk assessments, comment periods, industry petitions, legal challenges. When a decision lands, it lands hard. BVO's revocation sent change orders across bottling lines in weeks, not months. Legacy stock still shows up while inventories clear. Formulas fall in line behind the ruling. State shifts accelerate the middle distance. California's Food Safety Act drew lines on a handful of additives and set effective dates. For multi-state brands, splitting a supply chain isn't worth the pain. They reprint labels and redraw recipes ahead of deadlines because one compliant run beats a dozen carve-outs. Post-market reviews continue at FDA. State proposals stack up. Trade groups lobby to slow or reshape both. The tug-of-war is constant, but it's moving. Here's a second micro story, this time from procurement. A retailer's category lead calls 3 snack vendors. He asks: convert to tocopherols, drop BHT, and remove Red 40 from children's products by back to school. One vendor pushes back on cost. The buyer replies, our store brand already did it. You'll sit next to a cleaner option at a lower price. That's the nightmare scenario for a national brand, losing the shelf to the house line. 2 weeks later, the vendor sends a reformulation timeline. Cost is still king. Fear of losing space is louder. So where does leverage live for you? Petitions help when they're precise. Sell us the EU recipe is clearer than make it healthier. Retail standards spread faster than statutes. Vote with carts that reward clean label store brands. State bills create islands of stricter rules that ripple outward. And the quietest lever is the one you've already pulled. AB photos and customer service emails that show a company its two faces. The moment the spreadsheet flags dual recipe risk as a reputational liability, the math bends. Shelf life isn't evil, it's a parameter. But when it beats health life by default, it's because the system paid it first. Change what gets paid. Brands will follow the money. The cart upgrade. Practical swaps and buying power. You don't need a passport to shop the stricter recipe. You need a label habit and a plan you'll keep on a Tuesday night. Start simple. Trade glow for clarity, preservatives for time, and because we can for because you asked. Dyes first. If a cereal, candy, or drink shouts color, flip it. Skip red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6. Grab boxes that say colors from natural sources or list beet, paprika, annatto, spirulina. In candy, look for fruit and vegetable concentrates and no titanium dioxide. Sports drinks now come in clear or softly tinted versions with the same electrolytes. Pick those. With kids, run a low drama test, 1 week dye-free, keep routines the same, and watch sleep and mood. If you see a difference, you just bought leverage. Preservatives next. In crackers, stuffing, pie crusts, and mixes, scan for BHA or BHT. Favor tocopherols, vitamin E or rosemary extract, or products that lean on freshness instead of synthetics. Store brands often moved first. Simple lines are everywhere. If price bites, buy smaller packs or closer dated items you'll actually finish. Shelf life only matters if it lives to expire. Trans fat legacy check. Trans fat on the front isn't enough. Read the ingredients. If you see hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated, keep walking. Prioritize oils in this order when you can. Olive, high oleic sunflower or safflower, canola, then palm only when necessary. For baking mixes, shorter lists win, and butter at home beats mystery fat in the box. Meat and dairy. For milk, choose cartons labeled from cows not treated with RB scent. For pork, hunt for ractopamine-free, never fed ractopamine, or EU export eligible. Some butchers know which case packs qualify. Chicken labeled air-chilled and no chemical antimicrobials signals upstream cleanliness. With beef, third-party programs and EU-certified plants are good proxies. You don't have to go boutique. Mainstream brands run these programs because big buyers ask. Bread, grab loaves that say unbromated flour and no dough conditioners. If a brand brags about ascorbic acid and enzymes, that's a cleaner playbook than potassium bromate or ADA. In tortillas and buns, the same rule applies. If nothing on the shelf fits, the in-store bakery often does, thanks to shorter supply chains and longer fermentation. On weekends, pick up 2 and freeze 1. Bottles on citrus sodas, scan for brominated vegetable oil while old stock disappears. On bright drinks, avoid titanium dioxide and synthetic dyes. For energy drinks, do the math. Caffeine per serving time, servings per can. If it's 200 mg and 2 servings, that's 400 mg. Ask yourself if you drink 4 strong coffees in 10 minutes. Coffee or tea gives you control by the cup. Sweeteners, if you want the sugar recipe, look for cane sugar on sodas and sauces instead of high fructose corn syrup. In condiments, buy the version that starts with tomatoes, vinegar, sugar, salt, spices, not syrup. In yogurt, choose plain and add your fruit and a spoon of honey. You just cut the added sugar load without losing dessert. Frozen treats. Choose pints built on milk, cream, sugar, egg yolks, and minimal gums, guar or locust bean, over Carrageenan stabilized blends. For cones and novelties, seek no Carrageenan callouts. If you don't see it, check the ingredient mid-list. Dairy-free options can be clean too when solids and fat do the work. Now the buying power part. Retailers and brands move for 3 reasons: laws, large contracts, and a clear signal from carts. You control one of those, use it deliberately. Be your own staples. Post a photo of the US label next to the EU label and tag the brand. Sell us this recipe. Reward store brands that already set, avoid lists. If the house cracker dropped BHT and the national brand didn't, buy the house cracker and tell customer service why. Email 1 ask per brand. Remove BHA, BHT from product, swap dyes for plant colors, and confirm no titanium dioxide. Clear targets get forwarded, rants get deleted. Join local leverage. School districts, workplaces, and hospitals write specs. If you sit on a committee, push no RB scent, no synthetic dyes, no bromate ADA. Procurement changes supply faster than petitions. Micro story: one family runs a 30-day label reset. Dye-free drinks, tocopherol preserved crackers, RBST-free milk, unbromated bread, sugar-sweetened soda for weekend pizza, and an energy drink cap at 200 mg. No lectures, just swaps. By week 2, the kid's teacher notes better focus after lunch. The parent sleeps better skipping late cans. Grocery costs stay flat. Brand trades and fewer impulse buys cover the premium. At day 31, nobody wants to go back. Small swaps scale when millions make them. Companies already built the cleaner recipes for other markets. Your cart tells them whether to ship those here by default. Give them a reason every week. The choice you make at the shelf. Every scan is a vote, either funding shortcuts or backing the recipes brands already proved they can make cleaner. If you want this story to keep unfolding, subscribe, drop the biggest label surprise you found, and watch the next episode on how the FDA's process really works. Hit follow now.